Ida B. Wells Public Housing. And also now the official name of Chicago's Lakeshore Drive is Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable Lakeshore Drive, in honor of a Black man regarded as the first permanent non-indigenous settler of what would later become Chicago, and recognized as the founder of this city. Want to remind everybody that these discussions are intended to be less of a Q&A and more of a conversation between people, different voices and experiences. All are encouraged to speak up and add their comments. We always strive to do with these town hall meetings is to leave viewers informed and hopeful. We have some outstanding guests, and I'm just so proud and happy to have you guys with us today. And we're going to let you basically introduce yourselves as it pertains to this particular conversation. First of all, we have Ephraim Martin, who founded Martin's International, whose objectives include bringing nations together through music and culture. Welcome, sir.
Yes, indeed. Let me say greetings to each and every one. Indeed, it's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. As some of you may have known, Martin's International is a producer for the annual Chicago Music Awards, getting ready for its 40th anniversary. The International Reggae and World Music Awards, better known as IRAMA, that travels around the world, that will also be celebrating its 40th anniversary. And of course, the Festival of Light and the JSV, Jersey William Deacon Fest. Well, as you may have known, following the death of George Floyd last year, we have taken it to another level in which we call for the renaming of Lakeshore Drive as DuSable Drive. We asked for a major monument, nothing less than 25 foot, for DuSable, and for a city holiday for the founding father of this great city. Shortly thereafter, along with my wife, Justice Shelby Hall, we started the Black Heroes Matter Coalition, with beginning with some 30 organizations, which later on grew to over 80 organizations who joined us for change and for Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable to be recognized.
Well, speaking of your wife, we do have Justice Shelby Louise Marie Hall, who is here as well. Tell us, Judge, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your work.
Thank you so much, Jose. It's wonderful to see you again, and it's great to be here among these wonderful persons on this program. Thank you to Diana as well. It was my pleasure to have just finished to retire from the Illinois judiciary in December after 30 years, 8 on the circuit court and 22 years on the Illinois appellate court. I have a long historical background in civil rights activism. My father was the pastor of the Friendship Baptist Church and was one of 2 preachers on the west side of Chicago that allowed Dr. King to speak from his pulpit, and he spoke there 3 times. It was my joy to meet Dr. King and to become one of his drum majors for justice. And so when my husband came up with the idea of trying to give honor to Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable, once I was free of my restrictions as a judge, I was all in, and it was my delight to serve as, and is my delight to serve as the political chair of the Black Heroes Matter Coalition. Indeed, it was my joy to name the organization itself. And it was so timely because we as Black people have gone through so much and so much trauma that we thought it would be a good thing for us to celebrate ourselves. We don't do that enough. And even when we do, people criticize, well, why aren't you working on the problems? Well, I think it's about and. We can work on the problems and we can celebrate ourselves because that helps the problems. And so it's my delight to be here with the others to discuss why Black heroes matter.
Your Honor, it is our honor to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for making the time for us. Michelle Dester is here as well. She's an author, professor, public historian, champion of racial and gender equality. She's written and edited or contributed to a dozen books, more than that now. And the most recent, Ida B. the Queen, Extraordinary Life and Legacy of Ida B. Wells, which was released back in January. You've been doing a whole lot, Michelle. Glad to have you with us.
Yes, thanks for having me, Jose. And I'm so honored to be on the panel with all of these other amazing, inspiring people. In addition, I mean, you mentioned I am a professor at Columbia College in Chicago, and I've been working for really over 30 years on different projects in different mediums to help tell our story, to tell the African American story in its complicity, in its complexity, and to focus a little bit more on the positive contributions, because I think it's important, as the judge mentioned, for us to obviously solve problems, but we also need to see our triumphs and the contributions that we've made to this country. This country would not be what it is without our contributions. And so I feel very strongly, and then, like I said, I've worked in various mediums, film, written several books, now working on a lot of public history projects, in order to not only honor my great grandmother, but also as many other historical figures and even current figures as I possibly can.
Well, thank you for being with us. We really, really appreciate it. Been meaning to get a chance to talk to you in this kind of a fashion for quite a while. Next, we have Sandra Young, who was appointed back in 1999 by Richard Daley as a resident commissioner to the Chicago Housing Commission, the Housing Authority, and was reappointed twice, once in 2004, again in 2009. Since her tenure as commissioner, Ms. Young has served as the chairperson of the Tenant Services Committee. Good to have you with us. Thank you so much, Ms. Young.
Thank you, Jose. It is truly an honor and a blessing to be here today. I am just still so excited about our accomplishment with Miss Ida B. Wells. Just to tell you that we've worked hard on this project, and I know before it made its transition to what it is now, Oakwood Shores, the resident, there's a lot of other residents that I could say that would be able to take part in this wonderful event. And what I wanted to say is that Miss Ida B. Wells was a trailblazer. And so we at Residence, we looked at her, the things that she did around equality and some other things. So in our community, that was so important, because we have that spirit of hers as far as fighting for equality and making sure that we are doing the best that we can do to help those that are less fortunate. So for us, this monument meant so, commemorate Miss Ida B. Wells meant so much to us, because that was one of the promises made and one of the promises kept. So we are very excited about that. And moving forward, we want to make sure that residents know and encourage them that whatever you want to accomplish, you can, even living in public housing. So I'm excited, and I'm ready to get into our dialogue as far as how we move to the next level. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad to have you here with us. I know you're going to add a whole lot to this conversation, as will our next guest, Dr. Iva A. Carruthers, who is a founding trustee and general secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, an interdenominational organization within the African American faith tradition focused on social justice issues. Dr. Carruthers, hello.
Hello, and thank you, Hosea and Diana, for this opportunity to share time with these wonderful co-panelists. I am so happy to share in this time, and I'm really, my heart is full. I will just claim that I am, I guess, the elder on the panel. And so before I accepted my call to ministry, which took us to a whole nother level, I spent 30 years in Bronzeville, a professor emeritus at the Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies as a sociologist and a historian. And I was the co-producer of Know Your Heritage. So for 15 years or more, I co-produced a television show for children committed to telling and keeping the story alive. I am remembering getting a call one early morning from Paula Giddings saying, "You all get up." A couple of us sisters have to go to the cemetery and find the grave site of Ida B. Wells because she was working on a research project. I remember the ways in which Margaret Burroughs struggled to help to bring this moment to fruition. So I am here delighted as an elder and as one who's been seeing this dream fulfilled by our generation for over 50 years, to come with you to say now, as a faith leader, we claim this work and the evidence and the witness of those who are on this panel as doing sacred memory work. We're doing the work that we are called to do as an act of sacred privilege for justice and witness to do that which is right. And so now, not only from moving from the Know Your Heritage in the Chicago Public Schools, I am also able to share these stories at the United Nations as a part of the International Decade for People of African Descent, where we are collecting the narratives of people. And so I'm privileged to be here, and I stand and I want to honor the first Native people who were here before all of us as we begin this conversation.
It's so good to see you from our Know Your Heritage days. Now we have also Ernie C. Wong. Ernie is a founder and principal of the site. Has been instrumental in the evolution of the firm as a multicultural, cutting-edge design entity, fostering landscape architecture, the profession in the city of Chicago, and managing the firm for over 31 years. It's an established reputation for creative design solutions and developing thoughtful, community-oriented urban spaces. Hi, Ernie.
Hi, Jose. Thank you so much. I am so honored to be here amongst this distinguished panel of guests. Thank you so much. A lot of people ask me, what, as a landscape architect and urban designer, what do you do? We design a lot of public spaces, particularly with transportation and public parks. Some of the stuff that we have worked on in the past has been, well, we're currently working on is the Pullman National Monument, restoring that to its glory. We have also done parks such as Renaissance Park at 79th and Ada, right by St. Sabina's. We're currently the local landscape architect for the Obama Presidential Center. And last summer, during this pandemic, one of the things that we created was the 75th Street Boardwalk in Chatham, which was one of those things that really started to enhance some of the businesses to get back on their feet and get going. What people don't know about me is that I am a native Chicagoan. I was born in Bronzeville at Michael Reese Hospital, spent the first couple of years of my life in Lake Meadows before our family ended up moving to Hyde Park, Kenwood. And as a young man going to public schools at Shoesmith, I was able to meet Muhammad Ali when he was Cassius Clay. I was able to go to school with Gina Hemphill, who was the granddaughter of Jesse Owens, and met him. So it's been such an honor. I am now currently the chair of the City of Chicago's Landmarks Commission. I was appointed in 2008 after a young woman named Michelle Obama stepped off that commission to run a campaign. And so it's really been such an honor. I'm also currently sitting on the Committee on Chicago Monuments, which we are really embarking on some very interesting things. And I'm looking forward to this discussion as we move forward.
Ernie, thank you so much. That's a good place for us to dive in as we begin our conversation. As a member of the Landmarks Commission, what does it take for a site, for a place, for a person to be honored with a landmark here in Chicago?
So as a landmark, to gain that status as a landmark in Chicago, there's a set of criteria, and I think there's about 12. You have to meet 3 of those 12 criteria in order to achieve that. And so most recently, we have landmarked the childhood home of Emmett Till. And as of last month, we're going through the process also of landmarking Muddy Waters' home in Bronzeville, meeting those criteria of special place, impact in Chicago, and special person.
Well, speaking of special person, let's go to Ida B. Wells and start off with Michelle. This has been a long journey just to get the recognition that some people are now seeing, and it seems like it's all coming to fruition at one time for a lot of folks. It's been a long time coming, right, Michelle?
Yes, it has been quite a journey to get the Ida B. Wells National Monument completed. We started working, I joined the committee that Sandra Young and I are both on, the Ida B. Wells Commemorative Art Committee, in 2008. It was before Barack Obama was president, to give some people perspective of how long we've worked on this project. The first 3 years were basically laying the groundwork to get the project done. We started the fundraising in 2011, and it took until 2018 to raise all of the needed funds. And then the past 3 years, it was really Richard Hunt, that we were working with to get it actually made. So it didn't take, all 13 years to do everything. It's just that, the whole journey took, for me, 13 years. And I mean, it has been a journey for me. I never honestly expected it to take that long. When I first joined the committee, I expected about 3 to 4 years, but I just, things just worked out the way they did. And so it almost seemed like it became a life mission versus just like a one, project. But in the process, from the time that we began, obviously the political landscape changed, the social landscape changed, and there was the centennial of the 19th Amendment, in 2020. There was all of this sort of conversation about Confederate monuments versus who else do we recognize in our country, and then also the assault basically on journalists from the previous person who was in the White House, all contributed to the heightened interest in honoring Ida. And so I think that's part of the reason why in 2018 we were able to finally raise the money.
Well, Justice Hall and Abram, I want you to talk to me a little bit about why it was necessary, or you felt it was necessary to recognize Jean Baptiste DuSable in such a way with Lakeshore Drive. And there was a lot of pushback with this project as well.
So let me say this. I'm from Jamaica first. Let me say I'm not from Chicago. I was at a Democratic National Convention in 1980 when I was invited to Chicago by a state representative to the Black Media Inc. Function. There I met the publisher for the Chicago Defender, and who invited me to work with the Defender. And I was able to work it out with my other newspaper I was working for, and to make it to Chicago, to rotate between Chicago, New York, and Jamaica. But I didn't know about DuSable. I learned about DuSable from then Congressman Washington, when we were at a function, and he started talking about this founder from Chicago, from Haiti, the Caribbean, who founded Chicago, and was just never given it the proper recognition. He said that he went to the DuSable school, and then I started learning more about DuSable. Of course, soon thereafter, I was very involved with Nelson Mandela and for the freedom of Nelson Mandela and things like that. But later on, learning more about DuSable and realizing that for over 100 years, people have been fighting to give him his proper respect of a monument, a city holiday, and of course, a street. Because in 1830, when they were the first time that the city decided to name street in the honor of a person, the 3 people who were named was, of course, Washington, Jefferson, and the person who he sold his property to DuSable, talking about John Kedzie. DuSable was overlooked. Again, in 1927, there was another chance to give DuSable what is now known as Lakeshore Drive, and what was 2 weeks ago known as Lakeshore Drive. But again, he was denied, and a Leif Erikson was given that honor. Once again, 1946, there was another chance to honor DuSable. Again, they said no to DuSable, and the street was named Lakeshore Drive. So we're saying, after 200 years, over 200 years, the time is up. That's what we said following the death of George Floyd. The time was up for DuSable to get his full honor. So we went on a full campaign without looking back. We're able to call on organizations that we're familiar with. We started off with about 30. And as I mentioned, it grew to over 80 organizations. And we started, well, we first had a camp, had a protest on July 4th of last year, in which what we're calling for, not for change, systemic and anti-systemic racism, not just for DuSable, but for the policing in Chicago and elsewhere, and for this zip code, the U.S. postal zip code, to be revamped in a way that, because it was a...
I guess what I'm asking is, why was it necessary to change Lakeshore Drive to DuSable Drive? And I want Justice to get in there too, because that has been the big point of contention here in this city.
Okay, so it was very important to change Lakeshore Drive because it's one of the most important drive that runs right under the area where DuSable started this city. It was right below, above Navy Pier, across from Navy Pier, over to Michigan. That's where he started this city. He was never given his respect, like I said. Over 2,000 streets and none for the person who started this city. We said no to that. In 1993, when there was a time for Lakeshore Drive to change, the reason that was given not to change Lakeshore Drive is that it would turn tourists away. It would be a turned off for tourism. So said the Hilton Hotel. And we're saying all those systemic racism must stop. And we would not settle for any other street but Lakeshore Drive, because people of all race, all nationality, must be able to travel from the east, from the north to the south freely without being discriminated against. And what they're saying, if it's
here, even because our time is really short, although it looks like a long time. Justice,
no problem. Go ahead.
Do you anticipate the really pushback that we got, Justice?
It was daunting, to say the least. We were expecting, because we had a meeting at the beginning with members of our coalition and the mayor, and she appeared very, very supportive at the beginning. She was not that familiar with Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable, but eventually in Black History Month, she was all over the national news saying he was her favorite hero. So it was quite a surprise when we joined with Alderman Moore and Alderman Sophia King in an ordinance which they had prepared back in 1919, and it had been changed. They had made sure that none of the residences were going to be affected, and that it would be only the outer drive going north and south that would, and not the inner drive where the addresses were. And so thinking that all would go smoothly, instead, we met confrontation after confrontation, particularly from the north side alderpersons. DuSable already has enough monuments or in his honor. We don't need any more. Why don't you all just keep it on the south side of Chicago? We already have a bridge with a name on it. We already have a bust, which most people know nothing about. It's a small bust right there on Michigan Avenue at the Chicago River, which most people know anything. Just constant confrontation and resistance. Last minute attempts to keep the bill from coming out of the ordinance, from coming out of the committee. And then finally it came through unanimously through the committee. But then when it got to the full city floor, then a last minute waited until the end of a 3-hour meeting before the city council. And then instead of recognizing Alderman Moore, his mic was cut off. And instead of recognizing Alderman King, she was not recognized at all. And they went to the alderman from two to defer and publish, which immediately, no debate, delayed the ordinance from being seen at all. We called it a gangster move, and that's exactly what it was. And so we were kicked out again. And then the next time, it finally had to wait another month. We came back again before the city council, and it looked like it wasn't going to go through. But finally, once the vote came down, we were able to prevail 33-15, and to our joy. But that type of resistance was unexpected. This bill, as you heard from Ephraim, has been this attempt to name a street after Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable has been going on for a long time, including Tony Preckwinkle had an ordinance up which did not go through.
Let's talk very briefly to Dr. Carruthers. Is this symptomatic of what could be called a failure to really address our historical figures? Is that why some of the conflict is and what's gotten us to this point now because of what we didn't do back then, Doctor?
I think that for sure this is reflective of this country coming to terms and reckoning with the quote original sin, and the way in which from the very inception white supremacy or white domination and white hegemony has understood it is important for power that you control the narrative and the story. And so the reason we and the faith community understand what we're talking about to be the work that is sacred is because we understand that controlling the narrative and controlling what people remember and what people forget is important to how people see their own worth, their own value in their communities. And so as we are talking about the challenges we have confronted, I also want us to realize to what extent the successes that we have made, albeit it's been 200 years coming, those successes too make a difference. And so right now, for example, the United Nations is documenting these kinds of stories of success because it connects to this global resistance for people of African descent to be able to tell the whole story, which includes our story. And that's why it's so important for all of us to contribute to these narratives. And when we think about how far we have come to this moment, in which we now can look at the DuSable Lakeshore Drive, we understand how important it is. When we consider what the pen of one woman meant in terms of calling an entire nation to count for the horrors, the trauma of lynching, we understand that she changed the narrative that coming north was not just about let's go get some jobs and let's go get the good life. She changed the narrative for us to understand that coming north was also a part of leaving the trauma, the horrific, terrible ways in which we were subject to dehumanization. And it was a call for the media in those days to be a vehicle to tell that story. And that's why all of these conversations are so important. Lerone Bennett talked about the way in which DuSable was forgotten or misrepresented as not being important, as that kind of silence being the biggest secret of Chicago, a secret that we have now broken through by virtue of what we're looking at in that sign behind the judge, when we look at that sign with a great degree of pride. And I'm just so grateful for both the monument and our ability to celebrate with Michelle's family what it meant to celebrate the unveiling of that monument and to be able to look at that sign on Lakeshore Drive.
If I could add to that also, Dr. Carruthers, you know, this really is the story of colonialism throughout the world, quite frankly. And exactly what you're saying is that those folks who decided they wanted to conquer other countries or utilize their power wanted to keep the power. And in this country, if we are to call ourselves a democracy, the democracy needs to say we are all equal. And when that statement is true, of which it is not right now, when that statement is true, our stories will be told, and the truth will come out. And that's the point of democracy over colonialism, and we have to continue to tell that story.
Sandra, how important is it that these stories be told to young people? I know you work really closely with getting that word out and telling some of these stories, Sandra.
Oh, well, it is so very, very important for our young people. And if I could share a little bit with you, in 1996, the federal government came out and did what was called a feasibility study. And in that feasibility study, they came back in 1997 and told us that it would be more feasible to tear Ida B. Wells down and rebuild it back up. So for myself as being a leader and for the entire community, that brought about a lot of fear for us. So we began to organize and talk about what can we do. You know, we took to the streets and we marched and told the guys to put down the drugs and put down the guns. We're trying to save our community. And so we met with some planners, and the planners told us, we said, well, if the community changed, we want to keep the name. So they told us that we could not keep the Ida B. Wells name. So we actually met with Toni Preckwinkle, who was actually the alderman at that time, and talked to her about, we want to be able to commemorate Miss Ida B. Wells. That's where the whole commemoration came into place. And at first, we had some people outside of the community saying they didn't want that, but it was really about us, because it was our lives that were getting ready to be affected by this plan for transformation. So as we began to plan, Toni Preckwinkle, and I thank her for so many things. For one, for letting the residents not only have a seat at the table, but have a voice at that table as well. And so as we began to plan, we just one day in our LAC office say, well, as we plan for Miss Ida B. Wells, to commemorate her, how could we get in touch with her family to let them know what we're doing and try to be supportive? And lo and behold, we met Michelle Duster. She came on the scene, which then we were saying, oh, we're going to be able to make this happen, not understanding the tremendous amount of money and the time that it goes into it. But what it does for us, as far as our young people, is retelling our history, because I think we are probably the only some African Americans that don't know their history. And so it says to them, as they saw the movements, and they did many articles about Miss Ida B. Wells, the young people. They wrote books about the other side of the fence, and did plays about Barack Obama at that time when he was running for office. So it is very important for them to not only hear it, but to see it happen, but to plant the seed so they can be the next Barack Obama, the next Harriet Tubman, the next Rosa Parks, the next Miss Ida B. Wells, so they can be those people that carry the torch for our generations to come. So it is very important. So we are now in the process of, we have 30 young people who, under this plan for transformation that no one had documented, but we actually kept in contact with them, that they have gotten their degrees. And so they want to come back now and talk about then and what's going on now.
Michelle, I've heard you talk a lot about how it's more than just keeping a name alive, but keeping the work and the history alive. And that's kind of been part of your mission as an educator and author, Michelle, right?
Yes. I mean, I actually want to address a couple of things that were said.
Hmm.
One is I want to express, publicly my gratitude to Sandra Young and all of the residents of the Ida B. Wells homes because, yes, I'm a direct descendant of Ida B. Wells. I'm one of her great granddaughters. There's 7 of us, and there are a total of 18 great grandchildren. So I'm one of many of her descendants. But I just wanted to say that even though we have a large family by some people's standards, our family can't do everything by ourselves. I mean, we all have jobs that pay our bills that are separate, from constantly, promoting our ancestors' legacy is very time consuming. And so when we learned that the former residents of the Ida B. Wells homes were the ones who initiated actually the idea of making sure that she be remembered. That was so meaningful to us because then it's not like, well, the family wants to honor our ancestor because we're her family. No, she's a historical figure and she means something to an entire community. Yes. And so that makes it different than just us, making this request. I also want to address the fact that there is an Ida B. Wells Drive, which was formerly Congress Parkway. And when I started on this work to work on public history projects, I feel very strongly, even though I'm an educator in a formal university, I think there's so many different ways that people can learn. And it doesn't always have to be in a classroom. I'm writing books and people can read the books, but they also can go to museums. They can go to tours. They can go on walking tours and biking tours. They can be just driving and see the name of a street. They can see a monument. They can see a plaque. They can see a marker. And I'm working on all of these things as well as films because people learn in different ways and people can be exposed to information in different mediums. And when I started on this journey, I didn't know the extent of the lack of representation until I started doing research. Because you think it might just be where you are, but when you start looking at it at a national level, less than 10% of monuments and statues in this country recognize women, any women, regardless of race. And then when you break it down by race, it's pathetic when it comes to African American women. And so here in 2021, and we'll back it up to 2018, for Ida B. Wells Drive to be the first street in Chicago named after an African American woman in the downtown area. And now in 2021, for it to be the first monument to an African American woman in the city of Chicago. There is a bust of Gwendolyn Brooks that was installed in 2018. And then there's another monument, I have to get the name of the woman, statue in Chinatown of the first judge. And so there are 3. Now there are 3 recognize women of color in the city in 2021. And this is a city that's 30% Black, Hispanic, and white, relatively speaking, and then about 5% Asian. Give or take a few percentage points. So why don't our public spaces represent that? And I really think, going back to what you were asking about, Sandra, this is important when it comes to children, for them to see themselves, for them to be navigating their own space in their own city and see themselves represented as a way to, recognize themselves, but then also to learn and be inspired by people who don't look like them. It's all important.
Let's talk about that importance and the place that it has in our future. And I want to go to Ernie. As we look toward the future of this movement, if you will, or recognition or reckoning of these personalities and the past and the history, how do we go about it? What's the future that you see? Is it going to continue? Is it because certain people are out here pushing now? What happens to the people who don't have these groups supporting their legacies?
Oh, Jose, I really appreciate that question. I was talking about this after the George Floyd murder. last year, and about the movement that had risen out of that. And many of you will remember, that we had been talking about this in 1968 when I was 10 years old, looking at the movement as it started to rise up. But it took 26 years until the Rodney King beating that this came up again. And here we are another 25 years later. So it's 50 years and we're still talking about the same thing. I am hoping that this continues in a substance way to sustain this movement moving forward. And that can only happen by continuing to teach young people about this history, about moving this forward and moving that goalpost, if you will, forward. That's how that's going to happen. To Michelle's point, about public spaces, we have to continue to push for the naming and the honoring of people who look like us, quite frankly, in order for young people to continue to carry that torch. So I believe that it will continue. I think there's enough push behind it, and quite frankly, with the technology that we have now, that things are going to continue to move forward in that direction. So I appreciate that question.
Ephraim, I want to go back to Ephraim. What advice would you have to people who want to follow in your footsteps, to bring up these points, to have this recognition come forward? What would you tell people to do?
What I would tell people to do is to study their history, know your history, make sure you know who the people are who made, for example, like DuSable. There's so many people. We did a survey when we started July 4th last year, and out of every 4 persons you asked, 3 didn't know who the founder of Chicago was. So it's important to know your history and to hold on and study. Make sure that you put your heart to what you're doing. Never quit, because if you quit, it's over. Just believe, and if you believe in it, you can do it.
Justice Hall, to you.
I didn't hear your question for the fire alarm. I mean, for the fire trucks from downtown Chicago.
Has all of this effort, and I know you put a whole lot into it, has it been worth it? And would you do it again?
Absolutely, it has been worth it, and I would do it again and again. And indeed, when Ephraim Martin came up with the idea of bringing this coalition together, there were 3 goals. One was to name an iconic street after Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable. The other was to build at least a 25-foot monument to DuSable in the Grant Park area. And the third was to have a holiday, a permanent city holiday named in his honor, not just a recognition as a recognition day, which nobody knows anything about. We wanted to have a permanent city holiday. But it has taken, as indicated, so much work. And that's why I want to emphasize and recognize that sacred work that Dr. Iva Carruthers has mentioned, because that's exactly what it has taken. We have worked with people who, we had more than 150 speeches before the city council in the space from the time that Black Heroes Matter was created until the time it passed. Week after week after week, people, and I can't name them all, but they went before the city council and in those public comments and gave those 3-minute comments. Every single city council committee heard from Black Heroes Matter every week, week after week, until we got the job done. And so we cannot you can't pay for that kind of dedication. And so it is sacred. And so, but it was hard work. It should not have been as hard as it was, but we would do it again. and we're
Let's go.
committed. We need your help in order and we're following in Ida B. Wells' footsteps, and we're so proud of that street. So proud, I cannot tell you, and so proud of that monument. And
Yeah.
we rejoice every time, you do something like that. We said we know it can be done, because it's been done. And so we need your help in order to build the DuSable monument and to get that holiday done. Thank you.
Dr.
Can I just add one comment? Just to kind of follow up on what we've all said. In my experience so far, and I'm working, I've done work here in Chicago, but I've also done work in other cities when it comes to recognizing my great grandmother. She lived in New York City, Memphis, and she was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi. So there are 4 cities or 4 places around the country that are all scrambling to honor her, as well as Washington, D.C. And what I have to say is that based on my experience, and I can only talk about my own, it takes a lot of advocacy to make these things happen. And it's opened my eyes to how history is told and how it's celebrated. It's almost by the loudest voices. And either the loudest voices or the people who have the most power. And so if you don't have power, then you have to have voices. You have to have a grassroots kind of push to have these things happen. And I found the name of the lady, Laura Chaoyu Lu. She has the statue in Chinatown. So that's 3 real women that have public tributes to them in Chicago, out of over 50 statues in the city.
I want to go.
There is Mary Bartlemay Park, though,
We'll do that
in Westland.
real quickly, Ernie. I've got to ask Dr. Brothers, because our time is just about wrapping up. But Dr. Brothers, we do have pushback for people who say that because this heritage is being celebrated, someone else's heritage is being denigrated. How do we address that in terms of all of us moving forward? I want to talk to Dr. Crothers about that.
I think we address it by understanding that you come to that question with a different assumption. The assumption that it's an either or conversation is an assumption that the society is not going to be inclusive and that there cannot be a way to envision creating spaces where everyone can feel that their story is a part of the narrative of the whole. And that's what we want to do, because contrary to doing that is what we have right now, which is a world, a nation, cities that are grounded in a view of a hierarchy. Some have talked about this hierarchy of human value, that some people are worth more than other people, and therefore their story gets privileged more than other people. What we have to do is come, I think, at this with a different set of assumptions that says that everybody's story really does matter, and that it is the capacity to build that collective story that really brings about the union and the unity that is necessary for sustaining, particularly, quote, a democracy. And if we're going to live into this vision for democracy, we have got to, in the words of Ida B. Wells, we've got to turn the light of truth upon the stories of everyone in order to bring that vision forward. And I think that's why these kinds of conversations are so important. When I think about the George Floyd Memorial and how this relates, it was a young woman who grew up down the street from where he was murdered, that was living in another state, that her sister called and said, come home, just come for a couple of weeks. She planned to come for a couple of weeks and she never left. And now she is the archivist for the memorial. And she became the archivist not by trying to become anything, as Michelle has said. She was one who, in addition to her other work, was a minister. And so she would go out at 4 o'clock in the morning and clean up around the monument after people had left all of the commemorative, things for honoring that sacred space. And the family said, who is cleaning this place up for us? And it turned out it was a young sister, Reverend Janelle, who was doing that out of her heart. And so all of us can find things to do to make a difference. And I tell that story because It is those kinds of stories that we have to understand, that we have to embrace, we have to pass on to our children. In the question, I'm always reminded of Margaret Burroughs' question. Her question was, what shall I tell our children who are Black? What shall I tell my children? And if Margaret Burroughs had not been appointed by Harold Washington to the Park District as a commissioner and saw it her responsibility to use her position to make spaces for us to continue this intergenerational, transgenerational work, we would not be where we are today. So we are standing on the work, the sacrifices, the blood of so many who have gone before. And that's why I'm so privileged to share this with you.
Ernie, I think you were about to make some of the same points and also follow up on something Michelle was saying. But in addition to your comments you're about to make right now, what can the public do to forward this dialogue, to open up our spaces to represent our history?
You know, I do want to start answer that question by something I heard earlier in a lot of talks that I've been having about what corporations are talking about, DEI, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. And the most profound thing that I heard was diversity is where you count the people, inclusion is where the people count. And I thought that was just so wonderful and profound. But, you know, Dr. Crothers hit it on the nail on the head when she says there is this story where people want to say it's either or, and it is not. I mean, in the Asian community, we're suffering from this model minority myth, which is set upon to bring discourse between different groups. And I think that is really, you know, something that has to be, that myth has really got to be broken. And so, you know, to answer your question of how these public spaces can be inclusive and start to welcome more people, I mean, we just have to include them from the onset of talking to community before these spaces even start. And I think that dialogue has got to start early on and continue as that public space is made or remade, and continue that dialogue even after it's done as well.
Great point, great point. I want to swing back around to everybody as our time starts to wrap up a little bit and give some final thoughts about what we've been talking about, the future and the importance of inclusion, as you will, and making sure that our history, our stories are told. I'm going to start with Sandra.
Okay, well, I think this is an excellent panel. I am so honored to be here with them. I think as we continue, this is one of the ongoing things that need to happen, is to open up where you're able to hear each other's opinion and to talk about it, but also going back to our young people, that there's a platform set for them so they can hear some things like that we're talking about now, and then give them an opportunity to ask questions as well.
Thank you. Justice Hall, your thoughts about our discussion and about the future of what we're going to call the movement.
The movement.
Thank you so much again, Hosea, for having us here. And as I said at the beginning, it's about and. It's not about either or, it's about and. And the reason I think that Jean-Baptiste Point-DuSable is such a hero who deserves all this honor of the street and much more is because his entire life was about inclusion. When he built that trading post and 5 or 6 other buildings in the area, a farm and a beautiful home, and when he married Kitahawa, the indigenous woman from the Potawatomi tribe, when he traded with the French and the British and the American patriots. I mean, his was indeed the melting pot. And so that's why he is the best symbol of Chicago, binding it from north to south, from coming from the west, ending in the east at DuSable Drive, DuSable Lakeshore Drive. He is that wonderful symbol that we can all measure ourselves against. And and honor him at the same time in the idea of inclusivity.
Ephraim, what's next for us?
Yes, well, let me say this. First, I want to thank you and Diane for this wonderful panel, a town hall meeting. This needs to go on more often. This is so wonderful. So thank you. With the victory that we just gained, we will be celebrating DuSable Lakeshore Drive at our International Festival of Life, which is combined with the JSV Festival, Jerk Seafood and Vegan. And that's going to be September 11th and 12th. That's going to be at Lake Meadows Park, which is right off on 31st Street off DuSable Lakeshore Drive. So September 11th and 12th, that's where we're going to have an educational stage to talk about DuSables and other heroes and sheroes.
I like that. I like that. We will be there. We will be there right there with you. Rochelle, what are your final thoughts, and what do you think about the battles we've fought so far?
I mean, I think that we do have to recognize, like Dr. Carruthers said, this this sort of attitude that too many people have, that if people of color want to be seen, then somehow that's erasing other people, and that is something that needs to be addressed when we are even coming up with these ideas. Just this sensibility that certain people have, and it's almost like you have to assure them that no, we're not trying to erase you, we're just trying to make sure that we are seen. And like I said, I mean, I've run into this several times in different states with this sort of, well, you know, if you want your great grandmother Ida Wells to be seen, then that means that you're trying to replace us. And so unfortunately, you know, still I think the burden is a little bit on us to make other people feel comfortable with us being seen. And so hopefully as time goes on, there will be more sensibility from other people to recognize that we are all Americans and we all are part of this history. We're all part of the American story, and they will gain from hearing other people's stories.
Thank you, Michelle. I know, Ernie, I know that's your goal as well.
It is. You know, one of the things I keep thinking about is how much I learned when I went down to Chatham this last summer and built that 75th Street boardwalk, and I grabbed as many folks as that, you know, as I could to go down there and volunteer to paint. And I think, you know, Chicago, as dynamic of a city as we are also one of the most segregated cities in this nation. And we've got to start to understand each other. We've got to go visit each other. The good part about 75th Street is the food. I actually ate my way through that project. And I think that, you know, if we can share and share food with each other in each other's communities, I think that is one of the things that's going to start to bring us all together.
I love that, Ernie. We start with food, but where do we go after the food, Dr. Carruthers?
Exactly.
Well, there are two global concepts I want us to introduce. One is Ubuntu, which says, because of you, I am because of you. And that elevates my humanity if I can see humanity in you. And the other one is Namaste. You know, I see you. That means so much. And it's in with those, the spirit of those two concepts that I'm excited about the future of Chicago, because what I know is that McCormick Theological Seminary is in partnership with Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference to launch the first Center for Reparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation that is grounded in a seminary. And that's really exciting because we're doing that in Chicago. And secondly, in 2022, the International Organization for Restorative Justice has chosen Chicago to have their annual conference, their biannual conference. And so it gives us an opportunity to make real these ideas and to continue forth to have these activities, but that are connected in ways that can really change, transform, I believe, this city, the nation, and I have the audacity to believe the world.
Thank you so much. I love those words of wisdom. See, that's what I'm talking about. You may call it elder, I call it wisdom, my friend. Well, look, we are rapidly running out of time. I hope next time we get together, we can do it in person so we can break bread and touch each other and hug each other and share our space together. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you. This has been a very interesting and educational conversation. I appreciate you sharing your stories with us, sharing your journey with us, and sharing your efforts with us as well. Thank you, especially for all you're doing to your work and community service, not only uplift the community, but also to inspire others to appreciate and respect our history, which is a part of the American story. We hope that our viewers found these conversations enlightening, interesting, and we thank all who spent the hour with us, wherever you may be, however you may have joined us. This is our Chicago. We are all Chicago, and we all have a responsibility to uplift and celebrate one another. I'm Jose Sanders for ABC7, all of us here at Eyewitness News and the entire operation. Thanks for being with us. Everybody stay safe and keep talking and keep loving on each other. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
You all have a wonderful